Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to, before we get started for the lecture today, just give a few heads up on upcoming events. On October 29th, we have an organization called Peaceworks coming in for the third semester. It includes a Palestinian and Israeli who are both working in peace building to, if you want, it's going to take place right here in Madison. We have flyers. The Palestinian representative grew up in Gaza and has lost many family members. The Israeli lady is working towards peace building and peace initiatives within Israel, and they're wonderful people to talk to learn from, and to have discussions and dialogue with. So just to remind you of that. And then on October 9th, we've been working for a decade with Professor Mohammed Khalil, who's the director of Muslim Studies, on doing workshops on campus on anti-Semitism, Islamophobia together. And so we're going to be doing one on October 9th from 5 to 8 in the evening, and that also includes dinner. So you're very welcome to come and participate in that. This lecture is part of kind of what we do with faculty research seminars to highlight their own research. And I know some of you are in Professor Alon Tal's class, but he's a world-renowned specialist in all kinds of environmental issues, and he just published an article on the theme that he'll be talking about today on a reverse water carrier, Israel's climate adaptation efforts to ensure water supply for the Sea of Galilee and the Middle East. He's written prolifically. I think he has 5 books by Yale University Press, and is also always giving lectures and writing in newspapers. So he's kind of a public intellectual, a serious academic, and someone who started so many of the major environmental organizations in Israel, like the Israel Defense, the environmental defense groups, and also the Arava Institute, which is, if you ever get there, in the south, but it brings together Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanians to face common environmental challenges and to try to find solutions to them. And they're, I think, been one of the groups that's been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize this year, and that was Alon Tal, who started this organization, and he's also was co-chair of the Green Party and things like that. So we're really, really honored and pleased to have you here with us. He's taught at Michigan State and James Madison. I think this is the 8th or 9th time that we're privileged to have you back, and there's always great demand to have you back. We're thrilled to have you again, Professor Alon Tal, and we look forward to learning from you.
Yeah. Good evening. It's great to be here. I want to thank Yael and the Serling Center. The Serlings, I think, are arriving, so I'll delay that gratitude till they do come. Mostly, I want to thank my students that are here. Every year I come, I enjoy teaching here at Michigan State. This year's cohort is particularly nice to work with, bright, interested. Great to be here, and I'm delighted to be back. We talk a lot about climate change, and it's not a new issue. When I first got into the climate space, I was completely focused on the issue of mitigation. What can we do to reduce our own carbon footprint and our societies and our planet's carbon footprint to avoid a climate crisis? Tragically, we have worked very, very slowly. And those in my international environmental law class know that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a highly imperfect instrument and has been implemented very intermittently over time because of political reasons. And so we find ourselves in a situation where the somewhat apocalyptic visions and expectations. Come on up, we got room here in the front. The projections of how bad things are going to be are happening, but they're happening at a rate much faster than the climate models actually anticipated. And so when I was first involved in climate, in the environmental movement, there was a little bit, I would say, of disdain for people who talked about climate adaptation and climate resilience, because that was considered to be defeatist. That meant that we had already lost the battle, okay? But today, after a constant litany of disasters, if it's the Los Angeles fires or the Jerusalem fires, if it's the floods that inundating Nepal and Bangladesh, or if it's the things we see in Europe. Everywhere we look, we see that there are climate-associated impacts. And we need to be more resilient. We need to be ready for this. As we continue to try to reduce our carbon footprint so that the future impacts will be even less, and maybe one day even get carbon negative, not just carbon neutral, and reduce these instances. So this led me to chair a conference this past June. And I was asked to write an article. I'm editing a special journal issue based on the conference in the Journal of Sustainability. And I was trying to think what might be an interesting contribution from Israel to this discussion of climate resilience. And the truth of the matter is, I've spoken here at Michigan State before about Israel's water policy. And for many years, there wasn't a whole lot new to say, and I haven't really spoken about it in quite a while. However, in this particular context of what we can do as we look to try to, I would say, ameliorate the pernicious impacts of climate damage, I think there's an interesting project, and it's new, and I sort of want to share it in the broader thing, and then maybe we can discuss it. And it seemed to bring together my two classes, one on Israel, one on the environment, so we're going to talk about that. But if I should be going through material too quickly, or if any of you suffer from insomnia, you can read the article in Sustainability that's coming out on this topic. Okay, so if you look at the screen, what are you seeing there? You're seeing an unnatural island. It is in the Kinneret Lake, or the Sea of Galilee. All of a sudden, when the water level drops below where it should be, below an area which is considered to be dangerous in terms of the possible salinization of this resource, an island appears. And that is a warning that there's something wrong with water management. This summer, the island appeared. Very, very surprising, okay? So today we find ourselves at the Kinneret Lake is also the lowest freshwater lake in the world. So when you talk about their altitude, it's minus 212 meters below sea level, okay? And we have a red line below sea level, which is 213. If we get below the red line, we're in real trouble. And so we're almost there, and if it's a very hot summer and there's a lot of evaporation, we might find ourselves below it. So how did this happen? What's going on here? Well, it turns out that this was the driest winter in Israeli history. We hear all the time, the hottest year, whatever, but sometimes it manifests itself in terms of precipitation. Okay, it was only 2009, but basically this was the driest we've ever known, okay? And this is something which is a global phenomenon. Everywhere you go, you're finding out that more and more droughts, more and more severe, with greater and greater frequency. And this is a problem which people around the world are facing, that the water that they used to rely on, the precipitation, is disappearing, okay? So if you take a look here at the figures, our findings, this is an article that just came out in Nature in June, just a couple of months ago, that the droughts have increased in severity by an average of 40% globally, okay, over the last several years. And the areas in droughts have expanded by 74%. So the trends are not good. More and more areas are going to go from areas that had sort of water challenges to be areas that are water scarce and in water crisis. Now this goes to this sort of age-old concern that water could be a source of conflict in the world. This was something that was a Secretary General of the UN, Boutros Boutros-Ghali, who was Egyptian. It was one of his favorite mantras. The next wars in the 21st century are all going to be about water. And I've always been very dismissive of that position because I'm sort of a technological optimist. And I know that historically that's never been the case, okay? And I know that he couldn't comprehend that there has been a technological revolution, something I have alluded to in both classes, and that has to do with desalination. All over the world, people are utilizing new technologies, actually most of them developed at Ben Gurion University, to take water from the oceans and the seas and push it through these very, very sophisticated and effective membranes in a process called reverse osmosis, and about 70% of the water gets through and is pure H2O, and 30% stays back as more concentrated brine, higher salt, and all the minerals get there, and then that's discharged into the sea. China's gotten involved. They got the largest one in the world now, okay? But not just them. If you look around the world now, there are 21,000 operating desalination plants. Okay, so here in Michigan, lots of rain, lots of water, lots of lakes. But in areas that are water scarce, this is the new reality, increasing 6 to 12% a year. In other words, at that rate, it's going to double every 6 or 7 years. Okay, we're seeing a whole new way of dealing with desalination. What's the problem? Have we got a magic bullet to solve the drought problem? No, because let's take Africa. What about countries that are in inland countries that don't have access to unlimited ocean or sea resources? Okay, one of the common questions I get, are we going to run out of seawater? We're never going to run out of seawater. That's never going to happen, okay? It's a very, very trivial part of the seawater that is used for desalination. But if you don't live on the coast, how are you going to get this water? And that is a problem. Now, this is a picture of Aaron Wolf, who is, I think, the preeminent global expert on transboundary water cooperation and transboundary water challenges. In 1997, he made his database, which he keeps updating, of all those watersheds that are shared by more than one country. We have geographic divisions between them, okay? And so the question is, could we take water from, the coastal areas here and move it inland? Would that be something that would make sense, given the fact that many of these countries, particularly those in the Sahel area, are going to be facing a very, very severe crisis, existential one, as far as that goes. And that has been discussed over the years, a long time, about having a donor catchment and a recipient catchment, and what would those dynamics be. Okay, and it's a very different kind of discussion than the ones we had in our environmental law class today about upstream and downstream riparians and those kind of things. Okay, so if you look at the number of publications on this issue, I found this graph. More and more people are writing about this because they're thinking about it. And there's a lot of different issues that come up, okay? Ecological issues, socioeconomic ones, planning ones, and this is where we're going to be in this talk, okay? Looking at this issue. Because there is concern that maybe this is a problem. For example, interbasin transfers might bring in invasive species, okay? And all of a sudden we'd be facing an ecological menace that we didn't even think about when we started. To pump water often requires you to have prodigious quantities of energy to put it over hills and mountains and bring it over to another area like that. And the distances involved are enormous, okay? So all of a sudden water isn't so cheap anymore. It's very expensive. Not even to mention and we see that the water transfers have been, how should I put it, ill-fated many times. Many of you may have heard of the Aral Sea. Used to be second largest lake in all of Asia, and due to Soviet mismanagement back in the 20th century, where water was taken out of this basin and sent to other ones, it shrunk until it's going, and gone, okay? Same thing happened in Lake Chad, okay? One of the large lakes in Africa. And you can see what happened when you take water out of a basin. Sometimes there are losers, and the losers lose their livelihoods, lose their fisheries, lose their. So the EU, ever progressive and thoughtful, have made it very, very hard in Europe to have interbasin transfers. It's considered to be, well, it's just not done. So when they have the EU Water Directive, which is basically the EU laws about water, it prohibits any deterioration in any water body that could worsen the status in the donor or receiving basin. So basically, if you want to take water and transfer it to another basin, you have to show that there's absolutely no downsides, okay, on the cost-benefit equation. And that's practically impossible to do, okay? So the amount of ecological assessments that you have to do if you want to get a interbasin transfer in Europe is so great that nobody does it. It's just not done. And yet, here's an article from Iran. Iran is facing incredible water crisis. They're in the middle of a huge drought and demonstrations in the street. And it's not a safe thing to demonstrate, but people who don't have water are desperate people. And here's an article, is interbasin water transfer a remedy to quench dry lands? Everybody's thinking about it. So I guess the question I want to ask here, is desalination a solution? Because unlike Europe, Israel has always had interbasin transfer at the heart of its water policy. Its water policy was designed to be a socialist policy, where a country that has lots of rain in the north takes water from the rich and sends it down south with a national water carrier and sends it out of the basin and is used so that everybody gets the equal access to water, equal pricing for water, and the like. So it's a very different paradigm. And today we have a new project which, in the climate context, brings us to a new level. So just sort of to go through some of background about Israel. Israel decided in about the end of the 20th century that they were running out of water and that the population was growing quickly and that desalination had gotten cheap enough that maybe they should use this as a new, the foundation for their thing. So we set up, at the time, first we had 1, and then 2, and 3, and 4, and 5 desalination plants along our coast. Today, if you turn on the faucets, in most Israeli homes, 85% of domestic water use, you're getting water that just a day or two ago was salt water in the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, completely different reality. And there's very great concerns. There's a whole different lecture. Was it good for the environment? Is bad? It's been good for a lot of things. For example, we recycle our sewage in Israel. But when you recycle sewage, you have water which is very, very salty, because you take water which is salty and then it sits in a sewage evaporation pond and the water goes up and the salt stays. But if you have desalinated water, there's no salt. So when it becomes sewage, you can reuse the sewage and not exacerbate the salination problem that was such a problem for agriculture for the past decades. That's just a couple of the examples. If you have a tea kettle, it's not going to get filled up with all kinds of limestone and stuff like that there. And when we look at the way that Israel is looking at its water resources, you can see that desalinated water is going to be an increasing component of the water being used in Israel. We are doubling down on desalination. So if we have such great desalination, how did this happen? How does Israel find itself once again in a crisis with our one freshwater lake that's there? So you might say that it was a perfect storm, because Israel has 5 desalination plants, but desalination plants are mechanical. And the one that's in Ashdod, the second one from the south, from the map I showed you, needed to be fixed. And it took a lot longer than they wanted. And there's a war. And things take time. And so it basically became unoperational. At the same time, this was the driest year in Israeli history. But the previous 4 winters were rainy, a little above the average. And so when the water managers faced the situation where they don't have enough water because of the desalination's down, they said, it's been pretty good 4 years in a row. Let's gamble on a 5th year. And they had bad luck. And that's why the Kinneret Lake water levels collapsed. I mean, these are the pictures we've seen in recent years, all these kind of things. Because the fact of the matter is Israel is a climate hotspot where every year we find ourselves breaking new records. In fact, just a while ago, we find Israel had its hottest day in history on there. And that means that the rainfall, particularly in the north, in the Galilee, which is the rainy region that we have, you can take a look here and you can see the trends are not so complicated to see. This is the water map that I used for years to teach water management, where I think I discussed it in one of my classes, but you've got here the coastal aquifer, and you've got the 2 mountain aquifers there and there. And these are the numbers, only those are no longer the numbers. These are the numbers. And in the last few years, really, this is the average. So Israel is already seeing significant changes in its hydrological balance because of climate change. Okay? Here's from the Haaretz, our leading environmental journalist. As winter ends, Israel continues to suffer from record severe drought. And the Jordan River tributaries going down, down, down. And this is our one lake which has enormous recreational significance. It has enormous economic one. It's a fishery, but it is a spiritual place. It is also the place where Jesus spent his years preaching his gospel, and a place that has enormous, it punches way above its weight in terms of international recognition, the Sea of Galilee. Okay? And this is what happens when it's hot. So, now we get to the topic of tonight's lecture. A decision was made that over time, the Kinneret Lake, which had been the supplier of water to Israel's southern region for many, many years, the Kinneret Lake would eventually no longer be able to supply water. And indeed, for the last 10, 15 years, except for this year where they pumped a lot of water out of it because they didn't have a desal plant, nobody took it. So they said, you know what, we are going to have to change the paradigm. Instead of taking water from the rich in the north and sending it down to the poor in the south, to the parched desert areas, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to take water from the Mediterranean Sea, desalinize it, and fill up the Sea of Galilee with water every year, top off our resource. And you see here's a picture of the trial run of the discharge of that water going into the Salmon River. I'll explain it. But this was when we had the thing to go online. So basically, this has the first time that we have as an adaptation policy, a policy designed to say, okay, climate change is coming, it's here, we need to get ready for it, where Israel made a major investment, acknowledging that we can't just pretend like it's not there, but we have to be ready for it, okay? And here's a guy who gets some credit. And I must say, as somebody who's active in Israeli politics, it is extremely rare that you'll hear me praising somebody from the Likud party, the ruling party in Israel, because I'm in the opposition and I think they've done a lot of damage over the years. But Yuval Stein is sort of an oddball in Israeli politics. He was a professor of philosophy and science before he kind of got interested in politics. And he was a while there our Minister of Finance, but then he got downgraded to become Minister of Energy and Water. And in that capacity, he did a couple good things. One thing he did was he never agreed to have climate denial be the national policy, even though there was pressure at the time from the previous Trump administration. And he said, we need a new decision that will change the water thing. And I interviewed him for this article. He was very happy to talk, because he likes to talk. And let's see if I can get one of my prize students, Andrea. Would you be willing to, this is something I do in class, would you be willing to read his description of this? So you have here the words of Yuval Steinitz, and Andrea is going to be our narrator for this slide.
The reverse carrier was my idea originally. There were projections that climate change would lead to 3 to 4 years of consecutive droughts. I looked at our Kinneret Lake and I realized that if we did not act, it could end up like Lake Chad or the Aral Sea. I said to myself, the Kinneret is our national reservoir. Our population is growing. Desalination could be seriously disabled due to a military attack or to a pollution event. In such circumstances, the country's emergency reservoir has to be the Kinneret. We need to leave its water level at a maximum. It's not just security. The lake has historic and cultural significance, especially for Christianity. I used to joke, if Jesus does come back, I need to ensure that he'll be able to cross the Kinneret.
Because you know that Jesus walked across this lake according to the Gospels.
This seems to me to be a revolutionary idea. For the first time, desalination is not just for immediate domestic consumption, but also for preserving natural ecosystems and for water security.
I think it was a fairly revolutionary way of thinking about it, okay? I looked in the literature and haven't found anybody else who's taken desalination and saying, you know what, we're going to use this technology to supply a historic reservoir in this area. So in 2022, the reverse national water carrier, because we had a national water carrier which took water from the north and took it to the south. Now it comes in from here, the Hadera plant, okay? I remember I discussed about the plant that the Palestinians didn't want to take over. It's this plant. And the water comes up here and it flows in that direction there, okay? And this is the way it looks as the water goes that way. And here's the headline from 2022, the pilot run. Now, 2022 was 3 years ago. What happened? Here, though, it's very important to mention that the water was not discharged directly into the Kinneret Lake. And why is that? Because there was concern that the chemistry of a desalinized water is very different than the chemistry in the Kinneret Lake. And the assumption was if we can let the water flow in a natural stream or in a stream bed for 4 or 5 kilometers, it'll pick up a lot of the minerals, and therefore we might not have some of the water quality chaos or anarchy that the Greens were very, very concerned about because it wasn't natural, okay? So that's released. Now, here's a lot of water coming out of there, okay? So indeed, after his vision was realized, if Jesus does come back, he will be able to walk on water, but it will be water that was previously in the Mediterranean Sea beforehand, okay? But the question is it sustainable? Is this a good idea? Because it hasn't really been done, because it flies in the face of conventional knowledge and the European bias against interbasin transfer. It is interbasin transfer par excellence, because part of the idea is taking that water from the Sea of Galilee and sending it over to Jordan that has not enough water, okay? So that's really going across 2 basins. So I said, let's think about this and evaluate the project from 4 criteria. Water security. Does it provide the water security that it promises that it should? Environmental sustainability. Are we causing damage in the long term? Are we going to leave the resources and the ecosystems of Israel poor or damaged as a result of this? Economic feasibility. Are we going to kill the Israeli water consumers with new costs? And geopolitically, does it give us anything? Is it going to help us? So these are the 4 areas I looked, and I would say that as somebody who kind of really liked the project, it was sort of a setup. Like, I knew when I made these criteria that it might come out okay. And guess what? Came out great. So we'll talk about that now. Okay, so what is water security? Water security, an acceptable level of water-related risks to humans and ecosystems, coupled with the availability of water of sufficient quality and quantity and quality to support livelihoods, national security, human health, and ecosystem services. So here you have the desalination plants in Israel, and they are providing the water, which will presumably be the water we need for the future. The trouble is that just like I could go on Google Maps or Google Earth and show you exactly where the desal plants are, and if you were students of mine in Israel, you would have visited one, because I always take students there because I think it's like sci-fi. So this is a picture of Hassan Nasrallah, who's no longer with us, but he was the head of the Hezbollah militia in Lebanon, and he often would threaten, I know where those desal plants are, and I have a lot of missiles and rockets, I'm going to take them out. And people were very nervous about it, and he did try a couple times. They have pretty good missile defense, but it does mean that these desal plants are vulnerable, okay? And Iran showed over in the month of June, when they sent over hundreds of missiles, that they are very capable of hitting sites and taking them out. It's just, to me, a miracle that they didn't target our desalination plants. If I had been an Iranian military planner, that's where I would have gone for first, gone for that resource. But they didn't. But we know they can do that. Because here we have, for example, an aerial shot of the Ashkelon plant. It's just sitting there. There's nothing that if one of those, ballistic missiles should hit anywhere in the vicinity, you better have a lot of bottled water in your basement. That's all I can say, okay? The idea is that by taking this idea and turning the Kinneret Lake right here into a reservoir, if, heaven forbid, a desal plant is taken out, you have water for quite some time. It's a lot of water. And if you can top off the resource all the time, you'd be all right. So if I'm kind of going to wrap up this criteria, and I'm summarizing 20 pages in a few slides, on a summer day, the Kinneret today can still provide a quarter of the country's water supply. And if we cut back on irrigation, we could get even more from them, okay? But it only can do this over time, given the potential threats, if it has a reliable supplier. Because nature is no longer a reliable supplier, apparently humanity has ruined that, okay? So topping off the lake with desalinated water on a regular basis would allow the lake to save that, return to its role historically as a source of water. So I would say it's a big plus, thumbs up, as you would, for that criteria. But what are the environmental concerns, okay? Let's start with the concern about using desalinated water, increasing our burden. Because desalination is a highly energy-intensive technology. 4% of our electricity in Israel goes for taking water from the sea and pushing it with great pressure through these membranes. 4%, just to get this water out. And that means that there's a high carbon footprint, high energy footprint, high carbon footprint. So maybe it's adding to it. And that's an argument which I've heard before. And then I started to sort of deconstruct it. Because the truth of the matter is, as people know in my classes, Israel has an asymmetric precipitation situation. We have a rainy season, which is about to start in, say, 3-4 weeks in Israel, at least historically. And we have a dry season, which is from mid-April to mid-October. And so during the rainy season, we have a surfeit of water because we don't need as much water as we do. And it turns out that when we do finally fix the Ashdod plant, which should happen soon, and we get a new plant which is being built up north near Rosh Nikra, so we'll have 6 big desal plants, we will have a lot of extra water. And you don't turn desal plants on and off. If you have extra water, you have extra water. When they first built the first desal plant, they started sending desalinated water to the farmers of the South. This is an anecdote that I just decided to stick in. And the thing about the water from there is they said this is going to be great because the farmers in the South historically have used salty water. Water from saline aquifers, water that has got high concentrations of chlorine in them. And they thought the farmers would be overjoyed because they're getting champagne, pure H2O. And after 3-4 months, they showed up and said, guys, what's going on? Our plants are all dying because their water was too clean. It didn't have any of the minerals that they needed. So they had to go run back and they add limestone to put back different, and they had to add the water to make them there. And it was really bad for the farmers, but it was really great for, I was at the time at Ben Gurion University, and we got an article in Science and felt really good that we got a top publication out of their misery. But we now know that we have extra water, and that's the water that's going to be used because Israel's always trying to plan ahead in the water sector, okay? So it doesn't really add. We're not going to make more desalination plants to fill up the reverse water carriers. So that concern, you can put it aside. The second question is the water quality, because the water in the Kinneret is very hard. It has a lot of salinity, a lot of minerals in there, and the water that comes out of the desalination plant is the opposite. There's nothing there, totally soft. So the idea is that by taking out all of the calcium and the magnesium, you're going to be creating a water mess. So first of all, they did testing, and not such a water mess. It's not that big a deal there. And then by discharging it in, this is a picture of the Solomon River. I was there hiking. It was during the Iranian war, and I had to go. There was sirens went off then, so I had to go take place. But anyway, the point is that the water here is going to pick up a lot of minerals on the way, and it doesn't seem like it's going to cause such a disaster. But there's an ethics concern. And a colleague of mine, who will remain nameless because I don't want to embarrass him, but he wrote an article about how he doesn't like the reverse carrier because it takes a stream which is intermittent or ephemeral, most of the year is dry, and changes it. It's going to have water flowing in this river. And that's not our place to change nature. And that seems like a pretty legitimate concern. Only, unfortunately, it's based on a faulty knowledge of history, because if you go in that Solomon River, and it's a wonderful hike if you want to, you can walk down there, you see a whole series of flour mills. Mills that were there 150 years ago, 200 years ago, where people took the power from the river and made flour. But what does that mean? That doesn't mean there was an intermittent stream. It was flowing all the time. What happened is that Israel started pumping a lot of water from the streams and the groundwater in the area, and the river went dry. So in a sense, we are restoring the natural flow to this river, which was taken away because of human intervention, ironically, okay? So that's it. So Mr. Steinitz, Dr. Steinitz, that's you, Andrea. Would you be willing to read what he had to say on this issue, on the environmental concerns?
As Israel becomes drier due to climate change, if we have gazelles in the country, don't you think it's better that they receive desalinated water and are able to live here than leaving things natural and having them die? People are very happy to drink desalinated water. Why not give it to animals?
Okay, because the environmentalists said it's not natural for them to have desalinated water. But he said, guys, it's not natural for them to have climate change either. They're very happy. The gazelles will be very happy with that. That's his argument. I kind of agree with him, okay? And the interesting thing, not only did I agree with him, but some of the most passionate tree huggers in the country agreed with him. The Society for Protection of Nature in Israel is the oldest and largest NGO of many NGOs in Israel, and they are traditionally the darkest of the greens, okay? They're not sort of a light green. And they thought about it, and they said, you know what? The reverse carriers got only one problem. It doesn't go far enough. We wanted to go not just to the Sea of Galilee, we wanted to go up here and into the Golan Heights, because Unlike the rest of the country, which is on a national water grid, these places don't have a grid. And in a year like this, where it was so dry, and 20% of the water has filled up the traditional rainwater reservoirs, the people who are farming there don't have enough water. And where are they taking it from? They're taking it from the sources of the Jordan River. And so we're losing a lot of water. Here's a picture from the Banyas. For my birthday this year, I went hiking for 4 days on the Israel Trail, and you walk by this river, which people used to go swimming there. This is what it looks like. Ankle high, okay? And so they said, we don't want ankles, we want to get the water back. So do it more so. And then we can leave the natural flow of the streams to go down as they have done from time immemorial to the Lake Kinneret. Big surprise. Very different than, say, the Sierra Club would probably argue here in the States. So in the Golan Heights, where there's a large Druze population, an Arab population that have farmed traditionally, they're not going to have irrigation this summer. Nobody's going to bring them water. But if we would expand the river carrier, we could do well there. So I'm not going to read this long article, but basically the chief hydrologist for the Society of Protection of Nature wrote a whole thing where he said ensuring adequate water supply to the upper basin could meet most of the agriculture demand, put the agriculture first, he's clever, and would enable releasing at least an equivalent amount to flow naturally downstream toward the lake. And this would strengthen agriculture, reduce competition, boost tourism, et cetera, et cetera. So the bottom line here is terrestrial ecological health, the land, there's nothing natural about this environment. So the fact that we are putting desalinated water and letting it go there, yeah, it's not natural, but is it going to be better if we can do it? Because we don't have the luxury when you've transformed it. And humanity, by creating climate change, made it unnatural. So that's also something well. So it could be that desalination will save species around the world if we can use it intelligently. We need to be thoughtful, okay? We need to be careful, don't need to be arrogant, monitor it, but all signs suggest it's going to be good. The other question was about the environmental sustainability. What's going to happen to the Lake Kinneret itself? Because you're bringing in all this water that's not there naturally. Well, the head of the water authority, who was a guy named Gior Shacham, who was doing this job when this happened, he had a vision of managing Lake Kinneret he used to call the aquarium model. How many of you ever had aquariums in your house before? So is it good for an aquarium to change the water frequently or infrequently? What do you say, Abby? Frequently. Of course, okay. He says, well, what is this Kinneret? It's not just a big aquarium, okay? So what we need to do is have lots of water transfer, because that means we'll have less evaporation. And by bringing in the desalinated water and then pumping it off to Jordan and bringing in more, pumping it to farmers in Israel, we can actually improve water quality in the lake, which has been rising in terms of salinity. I think, was that previous? Yeah, this is this previous slide. You can see that when there's not enough rainfall and it's hot, there's evaporation and the salt concentrations go up and up and up. And that's not good for the fish. And it's not good for the swimmers or anything. So this has been very important, increasing or decreasing the residency time of water for restoration of Lake Erie, Lake Washington, and Sweden. So it looks like that the soft water impact is de minimis. They've done on-site tests, and reverse water supply will reduce residency time, which to me, if it's like Abby's aquarium, it'll be a good thing. Okay, so the third criterion that we're looking at is economics. Is it going to be crazy expensive? To understand the economics, you have to understand Israel's somewhat idiosyncratic, but I think actually logical economic approach to water, okay? So in 2017, Israel made a decision that the water system had to be a closed system, that any money charged for somebody from the water would be going to be invested in water infrastructure, but that no money could go out. It didn't just go into a black hole when you pay for water of a government treasury. It goes to the water authority. And they have a long-term vision. They have a 50-year plan, and nobody else in the country thinks that long. And so this full cost recovery allows them to go, because Israel's population, to my regret, but it's growing 2% a year. They know there's going to be at least a 2% increase every year in demand. So they can project on that and do that. Now, what do people pay for water in Israel? Israel's still sort of got a strong socialist history, and it's manifested in our water policy, and I think that's a good thing. And that means that everybody gets a certain amount of water very cheaply, okay? A basic amount, and it depends really how much you get at this level, how many children. But to make it simple, you get 264 gallons, I did the calculations translating from cubic meters, for $2.45. That's pretty cheap, it turns out, okay? If you look at people's water bills on a monthly basis. And if you want to have a big garden, or a few Israelis even have swimming pools, you're going to pay a lot more for it. You're going to pay twice the amount of money. You can do it because we can make that water, but you're going to subsidize the farmers who pay less than anybody. Even industry pays more too. So this is the way this system works. So how much would it cost us? Well, to build the reverse national water carrier cost only $200 million. I was shocked. And they said, yeah, we did a lot of clever things to reduce the cost. So over a annual, using a 4% interest rate, if I want to amortize it, we're talking about $9.3 million a year is what it's going to cost the Israeli taxpayers, okay? So there's 10 million Israelis. That means we're paying $1 a year per person for this. I think I'm willing to pay that, okay, for doing willingness to pay. So, and how much does it really cost? Well, desalination now, we make desalinated water very quickly. 41 cents for cubic meters. So, Macy, could you hold back one of those bottles next to you of water there? There's something like there. So think about how much the Sterling Institute had to pay for these expensive water bottles that we're all serving here, okay? That must be at least 50 cents. So, and we're paying here for 250 gallons, 1,000 times that, 40 cents. It's so cheap you can even grow avocados with it, okay? So, and if you want to talk about the conveyance cost in electricity, another 20 cents. You don't sacrifice resources for this kind of thing. You can do stuff with it. Here, I'm sorry I made you read it because I had a slide to do it for us. Okay, but that's what you get. I don't know if this is 1,000 quarts, I didn't count, but assuming that's what you get for 60 cents, not bad, okay? So the bottom line economically is that it is a very cost effectiveness if you feel that the Kinneret is a resource that we want to have, and there's quantifiable benefits for surely in agriculture and fishery production and water resource, but what about the unquantifiable ones? The sense of security that, God forbid, one of our desal plants goes down, we will have water from the Kinneret and we'll be able to take a shower at night, okay? That's very important too. Finally, and we're getting to the last part of the lecture, the geopolitical implications. What is this going to do for Israel's ability to cooperate with its neighbors and maybe help its neighbors out? Because Israel is a water-scarce country and one of the most water-scarce countries in the world. But you'd never know it if you went there. You turn on the faucet, if you're coming as a guest in the hotel or in my house, and it flows every day. Never are you worried about it. Not like in Jordan, where for 8 hours a week they get water. That's it. And then if they fill up their cisterns then, and God help the family that didn't fill up the cistern, they're not going to do laundry that week, and they probably have to get their drinking water in a pot from their neighbor. So in Israel's peace treaty in 1994, because we have more water than Jordan, we agreed to give them 50 million cubic meters of water, which would mean a cubic meter is 1,000 liters. So you could say 50 billion quarts of water Israel's going to give every year to Jordan as part of the peace treaty. And we've been doing it year in and year out, largely coming from the Kinneret Basin. And there's other ones there. Now, the water infrastructure, this is right on the edge of the Kinneret. It's pumped in here. You can go and see the site. They even have a nice little map where they tell you, see, it's coming here from the Kinneret. It's going to cross over into Jordan and the like. And then Jordan said, you know, our population is growing really fast. In 1949, when Jordan attacked Israel, they had 500,000 people. Today they got 12 million, okay? Our population is growing fast. Jordan's even faster. You can see the numbers here as they go up and up and up. And then they took in 1.4 million Syrian refugees. They are the regional champions in terms of taking in immigrants, more so even than Israel. And this is what we expect in terms of their water demand is going to go up. So this is a sensitive issue. It's a politically sensitive issue because people who don't have water are desperate people. And there have been demonstrations in Jordan, and the king is very, very concerned that his subjects get water, okay? Now, Israel had realized there was a problem. They said, you know what, we could actually give you 55 million cubic meters more than the 50 million. We could more than double it. You know, we'd like you to pay us for it because we don't. And the king said, we're happy to pay for it. You don't, you know, it's dirt cheap compared to having a revolution. And so Israel had an informal agreement they would sell it. But then the king was dissatisfied with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, which is not that unusual. I'm also a little bit dissatisfied with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And he expressed his dissatisfaction by pulling back from having any peaceful arrangements and making new agreements. And so Netanyahu said, you know what? Okay, you're not getting the 55 million cubic meters of water. And so Jordan was thrown in something of a crisis. Fast forward. In 2021, a new government comes in, and Naftali Bennett is the prime minister. And he says, the new prime minister, I want to bring back the happy days of cooperation with our neighbor to the east, the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. What can I do to get back in the king's good graces? And they said, well, you know, they stiffed him on these 55 million cubic meters. You could give it to him. We have the water. And so he did. He said, just give it to him. And 2 weeks later, look at the date on this, July 2021, he came into office in the middle of the month. What is the headline? Jordan's king. I was very encouraged after meeting with Bennett and Gantz. He was already 3 weeks later in the palace of the king. Okay? That just shows you how much water could change the dynamics in the region if we used it generously. And there was indeed, during that period of time when there was another government, we had something called Project Prosperity, which said Israel doesn't have much land space, a teeny country. We need more renewable energy, but for that you need solar farms. We don't have the land. But Jordan is twice that amount. People in my Israel class remember who got most of the land from the mandate, right? So that's now could be solar energy for Israel, clean energy. And then Israel can take its super cheap desalination, send it to Jordan. That makes sense. And this agreement was signed. Here's the initial signing. This is our former Minister of Energy, Karin Al-Ar, and the Jordanian Minister of Water. It was done in Dubai. That's the Dubai Minister of Water. And of course, the man who brokered it all, John Kerry, my hero. Okay? So this was the agreement, and it was signed later as a thing. So basically, and what about the Palestinians? The Palestinians also face big problems. Climate change doesn't spare them as well either. And they have doubled down on dates. If you go through the Jordan Valley and the Palestinian lands, every date tree takes 80 gallons of water a day, an adult date tree. That's a lot of water. You see, there are a lot of trees there. Where are they going to get that water from? But we could help out, okay, by sending water to the Kinneret and sharing that water with them and maybe creating some goodwill. So I think there are geopolitical benefits. The region is facing a disaster. Israel's relatively good shape, but our neighbors are not. So if we could transfer water to them, take the water from the sea and send it over them, maybe we could avert some of the misery which is awaiting them, and maybe we could create a little bit of goodwill, lubricate the wheels of cooperation. Looking at the water regionally is a good thing. It makes sense. It's fair, and it'll be good. So obviously, the article comes out very heavy in favor of interbasin water transfer and using desalination. But there are some caveats, because Israel's water situation is idiosyncratic. It is not normal. First of all, teeny country. Okay, so if you tried to do this in America and bring water from the rainy Michigan areas down to Arizona, I think you'd run into some cost concerns that would maybe scuttle the project, okay? But you could do it modestly there. The fact that you have seasonality, which means you have the surfeit of water for large parts of the year, mean that you can use that and not increase your carbon footprint. And even though that may not be the present government's position in the US, I think we should all be concerned about reducing carbon footprint in the planet. And Israel has just in generally a very, very regulated water sector. We know where all the water is, and we do very good things with it. But I think we can do it. And I think it's an important step forward as we look to the future, and one that should be of concern to all of us, because the climate impacts are happening much faster than we thought. But we do have technologies, and if we use it carefully, not arrogantly, but I think we can take the example of the reverse water carrier as a model which can be brought across the world and make the world a safer place from water perspective. So that's the pitch, and thank you very much. Any questions, comments, disagreements? Happy to take them down. Yes, please.
And you may not wish to respond, because if there have been any more about this, but as you well know, the Dead Sea's been drying up for decades. It's practically disappeared. And there was a lot of discussion of a carrier from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, which would not require desalination. I don't know. I'd never heard whatever happened to that discussion.
That's a very important question. I'm wondering if I can get to a map to kind of explain to people how this works. I have on my mic already. So maybe I can find a map. Yeah, this is a good enough map. So we use this to so what we have here is a situation where, if you see down here, this thing down called the Dead Sea, the lowest place on Earth, a very high saline thing. The trouble is that, say, the Dead Sea has one source of water, and that is the River Jordan. And it comes down here from the Kinneret Lake, goes all the way down through Jericho, and then it goes to the northern part of the Dead Sea. Now the southern part is already disconnected, so little water. And so he's asking us, how can we save the Dead Sea? Because it is shrinking. It is turning into an Aral Sea or a Lake Chad or whatever you want. And this is something which has befuddled Israelis for a long time. Now, I want to start by saying there is a debate, a robust debate within the environmental community. The vast majority of people don't like, in the environmental community, the idea of breaking water from the sea and transferring it directly to this lake. Incidentally, the idea of bringing water from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea is sort of not going to happen, because it means going up to Jerusalem and down, and that's a whole lot of energy. Much more, that was called the Med-Dead Canal. The Red-Dead Canal, which starts here at the Red Sea, remember, this is the lowest place on Earth. So you can use the gravitation to send it down with almost no energy at all once you pump it out of the sea. So this is the project which was, and Jordan was extremely keen on it, because they said, we can do even better. We can take that water and desalinize it. Okay, and then send the water up to Amman, where nobody has any drinking water. And you can just use the brine, the 30%. That's enough. We bring enough water, put that in there, and you can replenish the Dead Sea. So I think it's a great idea. Most environmentalists are very concerned. They have what's called the law of unintended consequences. Environmental history is replete with examples of mega projects which created a lot of problems that were unanticipated. And so they said, you know, the area here is very seismically active. And what if there's a big earthquake and the pipe breaks and all the salt water goes into the groundwater? And what if there's a chemical reaction because the water is different here than there and it smells, okay? And all these kind of things. And I was like, and you know, I do care about the environment, but the default is that we are losing the Dead Sea, and it's on our watch. We can't just do nothing. And so there has to be a willingness to take it. The trouble is the price tag for this Red Dead Canal, which started $1 billion, which is not a small check to write, is now at 6 or 7 billion. So when the World Bank did a feasibility study and they said, you know, this makes sense, but who's going to write that $6-7 billion check? Maybe somebody here has that kind of capability, but I sure don't. So that's really the problem right now. I think it would happen there. And Jordan says, you know, Israel's full of all kinds of environmental groups, and they're going to put suits and injunctions and protests. So just bring it up here. We don't have democracy. We can just do it, okay? So that's where the thing would happen here. But so far, there doesn't seem to be funding for it. But it's not like it's dead. And some environmentalists think, well, this might be the only way we can leave our children a Dead Sea, which is not a little puddle and an embarrassment to our generation, because it's on our watch, and we can't just do nothing.
How much has the Israeli-Jordan environmental cooperation survived the current war?
Wow. It's a challenge. And the big plans, like there was a memorandum of understanding signed between Jordan and Israel about restoring the Jordan River. That's in the freezer. The Project Posterity, this project here that's on the board, that's in the freezer. But it doesn't mean that it's dead. I mean, we could defrost it. We just need a different government that maybe sends different messages to Jordan. So right now, there's not a lot going on, and there's some small projects. A friend of mine, Yossi Leshem, has a wonderful project on the sort of below the radar, where they use owls as biological controls for all kinds of pests in the Jordan Valley. And Israeli and Jordanian owls seem to get along just fine, unlike the people. And so and that's still working. As far as I know, I haven't asked him, but a year ago I went to a talk and he was talking as if it was happening. But it's a very challenging time in the region. And hopefully, God willing, we will see an end to this war soon, and we can get back to the business of saving the planet. Any other comments or questions? Yes, please.
You cast the talk as kind of like a pitch for how good an idea this is. You said that they had run a test and that it, had worked fine mechanically, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the challenge to just taking that proof of concept and moving forward? What's stopping it?
Well, first of all, the test was done in 2022, and we're in 2025, and we haven't. Why not? Because it was raining for those 4 years, and they said, the water managers are uber cost conscious. Said, well, why should we be adding desalinized water, paying for the electricity? The Kinneret is pretty full from the rain anyway, okay? But now we've had a dry year, so they're going to go full speed ahead this fall. So it's going to happen. And the question really, and from a public policy process within Israel, is do we want to take it further? Do we want to bring it further north and connect the Galilee? And that'll be a debate. It'll be expensive. There's another question, and it is this. As part of Project Prosperity, even though nobody's talking, Israel is getting ready for it. And we are building a new desalination plant right around here near Emek Hefer, in the middle between, north there, right there. And the debate is between actually the Society of Protection of Nature in Israel and their allies who say that desal plant should go up and go inside the Kinneret and be part of this reduced residency time and then be sent to Jordan. And the people at Mikorot, our water agency, say, are you nuts? Because it comes out pure H2O. And that's what we should send to Jordan. That's what they're paying the money for. If we send it to Kinneret, it's going to have a lot more salt in it. It's not going to be as clean. And so why would we do that? And that's the debate in terms of the present thing. I think that Mikorot usually gets their way, so that's what's probably going to happen. But I think they wrote the article mostly to show other countries, with climate change, we cannot be locked into old paradigms. We're going to all be thinking outside the box because we are outside our comfort zone in terms of thermal comfort. And it means we have to change and think about things differently.
So, first of all, one part of the question is there any difference in the taste of desalinated water?
Yes. I don't think it tastes as good. But when they put in all the additional things, it tastes fine. But yes, it tastes a little bit like if you've ever had distilled water. So that's what it tastes like. It's pure H2O. It's distilled water, basically.
Secondly, were there any negative effects in terms of Kinneret plant life or fisheries?
So we haven't brought in the water yet, so we don't know. But they did pilot runs, and the assumption is that maybe it'll be about 10 to 20% of the natural water. So it will make the water softer. But I would argue that the water in the Kinneret, naturally, when Jesus walked across the Sea of Galilee, it was 450 milligrams per liter of chlorine. Then we took out all the sideline streams because that was too salty for people in Tel Aviv to drink when they were using the national water carrier. So they took that out and it dropped down to about 250. But it's been creeping up. This will bring it back down to 200, which is much better for irrigation, much better for drinking. So the Kinneret water, if you go in and happen to take a gulp of it right now, it's pretty salty, but we could do it better. So I'm actually thinking that we could get a benefit, a water quality benefit out of this.
What's the comparison of that to seawater?
Oh, seawater is 2 orders of magnitude more salty than that. Andrea.
I had a question. I watched a video of Doctors Without Borders about a nurse talking about the war in Gaza, and she was talking about the main issue being there's no water available for people. What is Israel's policies on that?
So when the war started, there was a hue and cry because some of the water resources were damaged, and Israel actually added pipelines. Even during the war, and this is not the first war with Gaza, we've had more, and water was never made a policy. There was a brief period of time when this government said we want to really get our hostages back, and they started pressuring, and they held back food, but they never held back water. So in theory, there's water. The problem, of course, is access, because it's a war zone. And getting to some of these sites is there, but there's no policy. In fact, I think and I'm not up to speed, but at a certain point when I was checking this out, say 6 months ago, 7 months, there was actually more water flowing in from Israel to Gaza now than there was before the war, because they had added a pipeline. And most of Gazan water comes from groundwater and wells. But the problem is that water has been, since the Egyptians occupied it in the 1950s and 60s, has been very, very high in nitrates. And also somewhat salinity. And you really don't want to drink too much water with nitrates. It causes health problems. So, Abby.
So I was wondering about the output of the reverse osmosis process. You said that there's a brine is the byproduct of that process. I was wondering if there is any effect on the bodies of water that the brine is then filtered into.
Super question, really important. And why is it important? I'm writing another article about desalination now, trying to figure out why the people in California, not all of them, but why they're so viscerally opposed to desalination. In San Diego, for 13, 14 years, they fought against a desalination plant, the Carlsbad plant. And they just canceled one in Huntington Beach. I mean, they didn't cancel, the Coastal Commission of California rejected it. And people in Israel genuinely are befuddled. Like, how come California doesn't want that? And their main complaint was, but what's it going to do? What is this brine going to do to the marine systems? Okay? So Israel, first of all, there's 22,000 desal plants around the world. We have some empirical evidence that we could use to this question. But Israel's been actually pretty meticulous. We have an institute called the Limnology Science Institute, which measures all about lakes and streams, or their government agency, and they are monitoring. And what happens is that Israel has made steps that we only release this, a pipeline takes it out 1 and now 2 kilometers into the sea. So it's pretty far out there. And then they measure, and the radius of impact is about 300 meters all around. Now, the Mediterranean Sea is not that big a sea, like compared to an ocean, but 300 meters is nothing, okay? But even more important, which finds interesting, is that the Mediterranean Sea is nutrient poor, okay? There's not a lot of nutrients in there. And it turns out that when you do desalination, one of the things you need to do to keep the membranes from getting clogged is using antiscalants. And those antiscalants have things like iron in them. But when you're in a nutrient-poor sea, having all these nutrients is good for the fish. And so they're finding this almost to be a fishery. In short, look, the jury's always out. We don't know, but I haven't seen any problems. When people ask me this question, here's my typical answer. There's a lot of things in the Mediterranean Sea that keep me up at night, that make me very worried. I'm very worried about the oil tankers, okay? 30% of the world's oil goes via the Mediterranean Sea, and there's oil spills. I'm worried about invasive species. If you go swimming in July in Israel, all these jellyfish will sting you because, well, there never used to be jellyfish there. But Suez Canal let them in, and then the water got warmer because of climate change. So now there's jellyfish for 2 or 3 weeks of the year, and it hurts like hell, okay? And there's a lot of things that make me worried about the plastics. Oh my gosh, okay, I could go on all night. Desal, increasing iron by a small area, none of this stuff is toxic. So I don't think that's where we need to put our concern. But there's people in San Diego who will say otherwise, and I encourage you to see both sides of the issue. I can only say, as somebody who cares about Israel's oceans, that I don't think this is not the one that we want to double down on in terms of opposition, because this is going to keep a lot of terrestrial systems going as well.
Okay, so just tell me if I'm wrong here, but your argument is that it's actually better for the fish and wildlife. I
didn't want to go that far. I was hinting at that. That would be a claim that I think would be scientifically unsubstantiated. But I've heard it said, anecdotal evidence suggests that it might not be problematic. But we do know, for example, if we want to take the American example, the Colorado River is going, okay? If California had more desalination, there'd be more water in the California River. And people in Arizona who have to buy water in water tanks now around Phoenix could get more. The world is facing a climate crisis. And so to lock into orthodoxies about we can't change nature, that's true if we didn't have a climate crisis. But maybe we're going to have to think outside the box in terms of climate resilience. So if there's no other questions, I want to thank you again for coming. And I want to wish those of you who are celebrating a wonderful, happy New Year. And I will see everybody back on Thursday in my classes. I look forward to seeing you then.